So I started reframing how I talk about tech, because I went, so far we've had a very reductionist view of what technology is. We tend to talk about it in terms of the digital, but actually technology does connect with self, other and environment. And if a cyborg is about using technology to augment the biological, then that's a cyborg. So cyborgs are really digital shaman. And shaman who are using plant medicine and nature in various ways are ecological cyborgs. And so it started off as either end of the spectrum. And the more I looked, and I started to look in quantum mechanics and spirituality and all these other worlds, I went, it can't be linear. It's not a linear relationship. It's a very holistic, interconnected. And so it became this bigger thing of once I saw the pattern, I can't unsee it.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The story of Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system called nature, which keeps everything replenished as long as we all respect it and participate wisely. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with folk involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, writers, activists, designers, adventurers, healers, farmers, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of life-sustaining cultures, in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth.
Greetings, Earthling. Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast. This is Dan, your host. If you're new here, welcome. We hope you enjoy this trip. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. We really appreciate you supporting this podcast project. This is a podcast rooted in these unraveling times, the great turning, as Joanna Macy would call it, where we unlearn together, explore new and ancient ways of thinking, being, and relating to the world, which put life and care back at the centre, and how we can more fully re-entangle ourselves with a vaster, interdependent web of life, learning to connect with our unique gifts and creative intelligence and stepping more fully into service, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. So, I hope this finds you okay, which is, of course, the maddest of questions in this moment. Before we kick off, I have a few announcements. First up, thank you to all of you who are commenting, leaving messages on recent episodes. Keep them coming. For one, it's beautiful to hear how these conversations are landing with you. Secondly, the more that you comment online particularly, the more that will help more people find the podcast. But it's just great to have that dialogue, that relationship, and hearing from more of you keeps us going. So thank you. For those of you who have become paid subscribers to the podcast, thank you. This podcast costs a fair bit, actually, to record, produce, host, distribute. And, we're in our 6th year now. We're ad-free. Being a 6-year podcast and ad-free is a fairly rare thing, apparently. There's not many of us around. And we are trying to get more listener support this year to try and contribute to some of the costs of doing this project. So for those of you that have flipped to the paid subscription, thank you. If you're considering it, we really do need more support. It's about £7 a month. So that's the price of a pint of beer in the UK, or a couple of takeaway cuppers a month, you get 2 episodes. You're supporting 2 episodes a month. You're supporting the writing on Substack and other community offers, which one of which I'm about to speak about. So if you can support us, please do so. You can do that at becomingcrew.substack.com. So we have 3 live community gatherings coming up over the next 3 months, and everyone is invited. They are live sessions, 2-hour evening sessions. They will be recorded for those that can't make it. We are trying to make them super accessible. They're spaces for unlearning together. They're spaces where we can come and listen to different perspectives, different ideas around the big stuckness of everything right now going on in our systems and cultures. And there's spaces for us to consider other ways of thinking, other ways of being, other ways of relating to what is going on. Our sense is that we need more spaces like this. We're kind of stuck in this binary, divisive space in our culture where it seems seemingly impossible to kind of to find other ways of working through this time we're in. So we're offering up these experiences, 1 a month. They'll have a guest teacher to bring some provocation. They'll have participation. There'll be reflective practice, creative practice, chance for dialogue. We kick off on the 28th of May. Our first guest is Bayo Akomolafe, has been on the podcast before, has been a guest teacher on one of our learning courses last year. Extraordinary human. If you don't know Bayo's work, I would really recommend coming along to this one. And if you do know him, of course, please come along as well. We're going to dig deep into the stuckness of these times. We're going to open up an exploration of whiteness, white stability and its current precarious state, and many other provocations. Then a month later in June, we have Azul from the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective, exploring denials and unlearning our colonial ways of being and thinking. That's going to be a really extraordinary session. And then in July with Ella Saltmarsh from the Long Time Project, exploring how being polytemporal could help us in this moment. So loads of details. You can find it in the show notes, becomingcrew.com/events. You can find out all of that. We're trying to make these accessible, a range of ticket prices to make it affordable and accessible. And really, lots of people have expressed interest in our longer form courses, but say they can't commit to these longer form processes. So we're offering up these in the spirit of an experiment to see, can we make these experiences more accessible? So please, if you're curious, come along, bring a friend, check it out. Who knows what might happen? So let's get on to this episode. I'm in conversation with Adah Parris. Now, Adah is a keynote speaker, futurist, a visionary artist and activist who inspires transformative change through the many threads she is working and weaving. Adah's working with many inquiries, including cyborg shamanism and the provocation, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? And we dig into this and much more in this conversation. But with reflection, as we were pulling this recording episode together afterwards, this conversation is also what emerges when you put 2 neurodiverse edge riders exploring alternative futures together for 70 minutes. Adah and I are of the same generation, a generation we're treading a neat path, trying to fit in. Only, I think, both of us to realise that there was something deeper, wilder, if you like, calling us to look beyond the kind of spell of progress and linear modernity. So together in this conversation, we explore the essence of diversity, of intelligences, of sensing the world in other ways, of possible impacts, of personal and collective responsibilities, and of co-creating different futures. cultivating and leaning into all forms of diversity as a means of resistance, rebellion, and possibility in the face of our monocultural, neurotypical societal norms, capturing us to conform into becoming obedient, consuming units of production in an illusional story of linear progress on a finite planet. So, we explore what happens when we challenge normativity as neurodiverse people, drawing on other forms of creative intelligence. What do we find along the path when we're walking on the edges of normal? I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is the Spaceship Earth podcast in conversation with Adah Parris. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Good morning, Dan.
I'm good. I'm looking forward to this next hour. And so thank you for joining. We've been trying, haven't we, for a while to see if we can do this. And I mean, whereabouts are you on Spaceship Earth right now, and how are you showing up this morning?
So I am currently in southeast London, so I'm in the Royal Borough of Greenwich. And how am I showing up this morning? Great question. I am a mixed bag of emotions. So excited because I am going to TED in Vancouver next week. That's amazing. I am very fortunate. I have friends, family, lovers, partners, all sorts of things. And yet I am feeling this, what I can, I suppose, describe as, it feels like anxiety, but it's not really anxiety. There's this, oh, you know what? It feels like grief. It's just beneath the surface. It's an uninvited guest, and it feels like now and again it's going to push through and I'm going to cry. And I know that it is very much linked to what is happening in the world at the moment. Not just the planet, the conflict, and not just the conflicts out there, because everyone thinks it's over there. There are things that are happening here in our own homes, in our own spaces, in our own communities, that is just making me go, yeah. And so I nearly messaged you this morning and said, I'm not in a headspace to do this. And I went, no, this is exactly the headspace to do it, because you're going to get what you get. It's just raw and unfiltered, and this is how I'm feeling in this moment.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. You know, for me, it's always about my heart wants to always root in the moment. I don't, that's what feels most just where my energy wants to go, even if it's uncomfortable. And also, what's the point otherwise?
Yeah.
What's the point of
and you know what? That is what we need. That's exactly what we need now. We need to not be afraid of going into those dark and sometimes ugly spaces and holding the mirror up to ourselves and going, I am part of the problem. Because otherwise, it's just sanitized crap that we stick on social media to make things look like it's wonderful. When behind the scenes, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of other things. Yes, there is also the I'm excited about things and relationships are great and I've got great ideas. And it's yes and I think we have got to correcting myself. I feel and I believe that we are in a place where people spend so much time focusing on arguing why they are right, everybody else is wrong, rather than recognizing that the answer is always yes and no. It's always both.
Yeah, this is the enormous challenge, isn't it, of this moment, is how to be able to kind of hold all of the contradiction and the mess of it all, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess like just thinking about the context for our dialogue, our conversation this morning, and why I've just been really curious about what you do in the world and just how you are, how you speak to the world as you experience it, and the projects, the ideas that you're working with, which we'll go into, have just always sort of connected with me, and for what I can see and sense. And I guess I just think that we're being invited to move into a different way of perceiving, a different way of understanding, of seeing ourselves, this earth, each other, to understand where we've come from. And so how do we start to begin to cultivate these different qualities, these different ways of being? And so I see that in your, this place of exploration, I guess. And so, I think I first came across your work. I think it was actually your TEDx talk that I watched. And, you had this, you started with this question, what type of ancestor do you want to be? Which I know is a kind of really core question for you. I mean, several you're probably working with, but one that's quite very alive. And so I wondered whether we could maybe start with that question, and maybe through that you could also help listeners understand, where the seeds and threads that you've been sort of following that's taken you to that. A sense of the work you've been doing. But maybe because that, for me, question is such a, it's such a powerful opening question in this, particularly in this time, particularly with this context that we're talking about.
It's a great place to start. Thank you.
Beautiful.
And thank you for really understanding my work and what I'm trying to say in the voice and narrative, and sharing that, your work is very similar. So what gives me hope, despite all the things we've been saying, what gives me hope is that we're able to have these conversations like this and find each other.
Right.
And to be able to go and amplify that. So congratulations on 6 years of the podcast, because we need more stuff like this. These are the conversations that should be had in what we call Parliament and all those things.
Right.
But, So,
who knows what might be coming?
I know, right? I feel like I've always been trying to put a language to that question. So, as a child, as a social justice warrior, I've always had this very strong, and even about to say, I can feel it in my stomach, this very strong sense of what is right and what is wrong, and very strong sense of fairness and injustice. And so those are the things that have always had a very visceral, physical connection with me. So it means that I know that I'm connected to everything, and that it doesn't have to be my lived experience, my story, my what have you, to able to know that that's right or wrong. And my mum, I'm the eldest of three, and my mum brought us up that life is about experiences, not things. So we've gone out and we've always, now there's also understanding, there's a lot of understanding that and self-reflection, because gymnastics, ballet, running in the forest, brass rubbing, library, all of these things, holidays with butlins and pontins, and it was always about doing things and putting ourselves in spaces that may be a little difficult or different, but having the space to self-reflect. And so my life has been like that. And my career, the earlier part of my career, to many from the outside, it looked like I just couldn't make up my mind about what I wanted to do, because I was jumping around in different things. And I now know that I've had this kind of waterfall effect of I go into a space, I understand it, I understand the language, I learn, I ask questions, and then that filters into the next thing. And so there's always been, my degree started with pure and applied maths and educational studies. I went into London Business School, worked at London Business School. So education, understanding marketing, communications, worked in advertising, worked in tech, worked in education. So built and helped to build and run an advertising school. So it's always been this pattern. And the common thread has always been, it's all about this. Where's the human? What about nature? Where's this? I've always had that. However, I never really had my voice. And so I used to just be thinking.
So a sense of separation is what
Yeah.
you had that sense of separation.
There was always, I didn't understand why. Well, my mum will say as a child, my biggest heartbreak was I couldn't understand why I couldn't fit in. And I then built this narrative that I always like to be on the outside because that's how I move. But really, it was just I didn't know how to fit in. And now I understand that I have ADHD, combined ADHD and borderline autism. So yes, I don't understand those nuances. And so it meant that you talked about language, that idea of language. I don't understand some of the social nuances. And so things like when people say, I'm going to be honest with you, my brain goes, well, so what, were you lying the whole time then? Up until this point, this is the point now where you're going to start telling me the truth. So it's been that kind of perception of the world and not understanding why nobody is asking those questions that has led me to do the things I do. And then there were some significant moments. And people talk about it, Burning Man, but going to Burning Man, suddenly I was like, I'm spending a fortune to go to this place in the desert to be myself, unfiltered. Why? For a week? That's wrong. I need to be able to do that all the time. So what are the values that I am going to live by that mean that I can always be, where it's safe, of course, be myself? And so it's been this collecting of ideas and frameworks and understanding. And then it got to a point, I've also been really fortunate in that some people have recognized things in me and give me an opportunity to share. And so I was approached in, 2019? I was approached by Sony Music to write a manifesto. Well, it was for a podcast actually that was sponsored by Sony Music, and I was approached to write a manifesto for women. And at the time I had been looking and seeing these patterns around, well, it feels like people are looking for a new religion. They're looking for something external to themselves that negates their responsibility for doing the right thing. So AI, technology, it was also the time of people going on shamanic tourism. I'm going to go and do ayahuasca in Peru because it makes me feel great and I come back and then I'm enlightened. And so it just felt like I was recognizing all these patterns. And it got to a point where I actually gave it a name, and it was Cyborg Shamanism. And I can explain more about why that was later. But I gave this stuff a name. And so I was asked in this podcast to write a manifesto for women. And I went, well, we have to start by remembering who we are and remembering that we are part of everything and that what we are creating is creating us. And so I wrote this Cyborg Shamanism manifesto for women that talked about there is no one way of being a woman, that we are, as women, we are usually measured in relation to somebody else, so daughter, sister, mother, not Adah. And that we have been the architects and the technologists and the futurists and the creators of nations and systems and structures. And if we don't remember that, then we continue to be lost. And so that's where my work started to weave these patterns. And so how I've got here is by recognizing patterns in spaces where people didn't really recognize them, or at least didn't articulate that. And having great mentors who went, don't be afraid to ask your questions, don't be afraid to speak. And then finally being able to find ways to create safe and brave spaces where people felt that they could trust me and they could go, I just don't know. Because that's the start of a conversation. If you get the egos out the way and go, look, I really don't know. I'm not sure. And I feel vulnerable and I want to do something different. How can we start? Where do we start? Where do I start?
Wow. There's a lot there.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, no, gosh, because it's like, you know, this.
But that's it, right? That's the reality. Yes, there's a lot there because that's how it is.
Well, it is, because it is. You can't simplify
And we
this.
try.
That's the problem, right? We've been trying to sort of like make sense. I remember.
And we put them in little boxes and go, well, I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to deal with diversity. I'm going to deal with gender. I'm going to deal with, and it isn't like that. And the more we try and put things in these boxes rather than going, it's really bloody complex.
Yeah.
And actually the best place to learn how to deal with that and how to navigate that is to look at nature.
Mm.
And that's what I do.
It's, I mean, we'll go down that portal shortly, and it's kind of like, but there was, it reminded me of something Bayo Akamalafi shared with me. It was something that he had been shared, and I can't remember who it was, but it was a First Nation woman from some First Nation tribe, but he couldn't quite recall. But she'd said something like, you know, we believe there's 100 senses in the world, and making sense is only one of them. So this whole idea that, you know, and we in this westernized culture, you know, we've put everything into trying to, you know, we have to make sense of everything. Everything has to, you know, we have to find a sense to it. It has to be a rational way of understanding things. And actually, I think this is part again of this moment, isn't it? This ability to, like, how do we learn to kind of let go of our knowingness or our certainty, and then open up, which I think, again, I get a lot from the work you're exploring with cyborg shamanism, with the sort of ancestral work, but this idea of, you know, for me, there is a vast amount of intelligence out there, and ways of knowing that we could be beginning to learn to practice and draw on, and feel, for me at least, in the, you know, the practice that I'm doing, it's like, that's where I see the possibility, because when I get stuck in modernity and the making sense of everything and the kind of putting, it's like, I'm like, I just can't, I feel so overwhelmed. And yet when I step into, you know, opening up to the more than human world, or beginning to sort of explore some of my ancestral kind of story, or then if I keep showing up and I keep practicing, then there's possibility there. So anyway, I thought maybe we could just...
because it's about choice, right?
Right.
It's about choice. A friend said to me, the greatest lottery in life is where you were born and when and to whom. We have no control over that. And after that, most other things, you know, and I am speaking from a position of privilege, but and we have more choices than we like to believe sometimes.
Very true, actually. And it's, well, and I think some of it is because, again, I guess, and I'm speaking to the culture that I'm living in, that I'm experiencing, but there are a lot of that has been either forgotten or never activated, actually, I think, in many folks, right? So,
and in many ways, so what I'm thinking is, or what I'm working through my head, is that in many ways we all come from indigenous cultures, right? And sometimes we forget that every land, every physical land had first people at some point, and that we, you know, with my tech futurist hat on, we talk about we're in the 4th or 5th, or maybe even the 6th industrial revolution. And we have forgotten many of our old ways of being, because when we got to the first industrial revolution, everything suddenly became, we need to make it bigger, better and faster. And that's what, as much as I, in the tech world, you know, social media and all these things do. I remember when I got my first mobile phone, I had to go to a warehouse in West London to go and pick it up. What was it called? Mercury Communications or something. And I was like, right, this is great. It's going to help me do better. And then I just forgot every single phone number. What did I do with that memory? It was, you know, what did I do with that bit of brain capacity? I don't know.
Yeah.
So and those things, that knowledge, those insights, that wisdom is still within us. I do believe it's still within us. Because if we can do our DNA and trace back to my maternal side is 1700 Coptic Egyptian and Ashkenazi Jewish. If you can still trace that blood, then why isn't some of that memory still in us? It is. We just have removed ourselves from it to the point where we are now creating technologies that somehow we don't recognize is actually trying to replicate what nature does.
It's making me think of, well, a lot of stuff again. It's making me think of this sort of kind of, there's this kind of the march of progress, which sort of drives us to kind of let go of everything that's come before, or see, like, again, this the binariness of going backwards, or that's from the past. And obviously we're really starting to understand, like, how so much intelligence from our kind of ancient ancestors and our indigenous brothers and sisters, the reason it's still alive and because it works.
Yeah.
And there's something about, and I know that's in your work as well, this sort of exploration. I guess that's what the cyborg shamanism is in some ways looking at, is this kind of ancient and modern, and what's the weave between these different ways of knowing the world.
Yeah.
And so maybe we could speak a bit to that. But there's also something about the severance. It's making me think of something I heard Tyson Yunkapour to say recently, which was that the only way to actually conserve data is to pass it on orally in between generations.
I heard that interview.
Right.
I heard that interview.
Right.
Brilliant.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, because we're building all these systems, I mean, like what we're doing constantly, right? We're using all this extraordinary amounts of technology and energy to support this way of life.
Yeah.
And actually, what's going to happen to all of this content and all this stuff? I mean, I don't know. Anyway, it's a big question. But
It's why now, with hindsight, I really understood why I called my company the House of Griots. Griots are African oral storytellers. And that was years ago, before I really even started this work. That's what I named my company, because I went, no, I am a storyteller. And I think there is something really valuable about that we do need to value. What happened is that as I said, I started to recognize patterns in these different spaces. And so what I realized is that we are using technology to help us do three things: to help us understand and navigate our relationship with ourselves, with others, and with our environment. And so at the time, my work was in this kind of the tech world and working with Telefonica and startups and advertising. And I just kept going, well, where's the human in this? Or where's the conversation about the more than human in all of this, these digital things? And I had already been in that kind of hippie world. And I say that with love and with fondness, just like I call myself a weirdo sometimes as well. Because that's another thing. We have to reclaim language because it gets used and changed in so many different ways. So I don't mind saying I'm a weirdo. It makes me laugh and I love it. And so we were looking at this world of digital technology as a starting point. I was like, well, what are cyborgs and this transhumanism? We're using technology, digital technology, to augment the biological, right? And so that's a cyborg to me. And then I was brought up Catholic, and I was taught to believe in a God who I cannot see that helps me understand myself, my others, and my environment. And in the shamanic world, there's all sorts of, plant medicine and sound meditations and various ways of, and even deep meditation and breath work are things that are used to help us understand self, other, and environment. And I went, well, we're all trying to do the same bloody thing. So why is it that this digital stuff gets more investment, more amplification than this other stuff? And to me, that's capitalism. That's kind of And I went, well, if we're all trying to do the same thing, then all of these things are technologies. And so I started reframing how I talk about tech, because I went, so far we've had a very reductionist view of what technology is. We tend to talk about it in terms of the digital, but actually technology does connect with self, other, and environment. And if a cyborg is about using technology to augment the biological, then that's a cyborg. So cyborgs are really digital shaman, and shaman who are using plant medicine and nature in various ways are ecological cyborgs. And so it started off as either end of the spectrum. And the more I looked, and I started to look in quantum mechanics and, spirituality and all these other worlds, I went, it can't be linear. It's not a linear relationship. It's a very holistic, interconnected. And so it became this bigger thing of once I saw the pattern, I can't unsee it. So it then becomes, look, I mentioned it earlier, COVID-19. That could be a form of technology because it impacted our relationship with self, other, and our environment. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to create relationships. That's it. And the difference is, and most of our big problems in the world, whether it's climate crisis or some form of marginalization, discrimination, are based on two things: perception of value and perception of impact. And we have created societies, especially in the West, that our measure of success is based on seeing humans and nature as resources. And indigenous cultures and First Nations cultures don't have it that way. There is a interconnected symbiotic relationship of the reverence with those others, the more than human. And my work is about recognizing that reverence, not being colonial, not extractive as many have come before, but recognizing the reverence and the essence of that and saying, look, we are building more and more technologies to make us go faster, digital technologies to go faster and faster and faster, without recognizing that what we're doing is replicating what is already there. So why not you look there to find the answers to most of the problems that we have?
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
If you'd like to support the running of the Spaceship Earth podcast, head over to our Substack and sign up. You'll get every episode straight to your inbox, weekly writing, plus other crew offerings. We're grateful for whatever you can give. Join us at becomingcrew.substack.com. Wow. It's gosh, it's brilliant. I love listening to you because it's just, I've got stuff popping constant, there's just all kinds of things coming up, but I want to go back to that piece where you were talking about, your time in working sort of more intentionally in the technology space. And I spent probably about 5 years of my sort of early career working predominantly with Nokia, actually, right at the start of, so I can really connect with some of what you're speaking to. But what strikes me, and then you're speaking about, different ways of, particularly more indigenous cultures have always practiced of opening ourselves up to a sort of much bigger intelligence, whether that is through rites of passage, or whether it's through, like you say, breath work, whether it's through yoga. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that allow us, sonics particularly, that can open us up. And I was listening to something recently about, it was Chief Nunawa, who was talking about, again, in the West, they see the westernized, the disease in Western culture of this, the body is an extension of the land. It always has been, right? And so we've had this severance in our culture. And what I see a lot with sort of fast technology, particularly social technologies or personal technologies, which we were kind of have been led to believe. And I remember working with design teams bringing these things out back in the day, and this is all about connecting us, all about like giving us this extraordinary ability to connect with one another. But for me, like what I'm sort of sensing and witnessing and seeing play out over the years is this disconnection, and the disconnection, I think, from body, land, bigger nature, whatever we want to call it, right? This living earth, and particularly our bodies. And I see this a lot I see it in youngsters, and this sort of disconnection between the technology is driving us in this way, but we've lost this kind of understanding. Or we've lost the ability, or maybe we never even had it, this ability to tune into the intelligence that's within us, that's around us, that's available in the land. And so I think I'm curious as to where you see, how might we sort of bring these things closer together or into a more symbiotic relationship? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, completely. Because when you were talking, what came up for me is that you mentioned the indigenous woman who said 100 senses, right? I think that starts as recognizing that there are more than 5 or 6 or however many flipping senses that people tend to think. Because we put these limits around ourselves that then become a self-fulfilling prophecy. That we only have the sense of smell and touch and taste and hearing and sight. No, we don't. We have interoception. We have all of these things that are happening in us that I think many have become afraid of trusting those senses. And there are so many different types of intelligence. Well, firstly, that whole IQ quotient that could be a podcast episode in itself, because it's, those things are created to try and divide and marginalize and continue to maintain the status quo when there are many ways of being. And so my work started with that intellectual bit. And the more I have discovered and the more I've got into digital technology, the more I've gone, well, actually, I need to get into my body. I need to understand other ways of being, other ways of perceiving. So you mentioned sound. I have discovered that I have a form of synesthesia. So I see music as sound, as colors and patterns, and sometimes, all sorts of things. I thought everybody experienced it like that. And so now recognizing that I take that ability and I turn it into immersive experiences. I create sound art that help other people drop into this noise of the outer layer of I'm a futurist, I'm a strategist, I'm this, and drop into your own space of what lies beneath the surface. Beneath the iceberg an iceberg beneath the water is this bigger piece that we tend to forget about. So my work now is about making the invisible visible. And I don't have one medium to do that. So it could be a talk. It could be I'm, a non-executive director roles. It could be as an artist, mixed media. And I think that that's where we start, is by going, it's okay not to have this cerebral piece.
It's making me think, do you think that's the role for weirdos like us?
Completely.
I mean that in all the best way. I mean that in all the right. But no, I'm being very serious because again, it's like how to disrupt these patterns of stuckness, right?
Yeah. We more neurodivergent, neurospicy people are increasingly designing our systems and structures, our technologies. And so the same pattern recognition that you and I have and ways of seeing are now being, I feel increasingly we are increasingly entering spaces that are about design. And that's what gives me a little bit more hope, is that the neurospicy people, us, are increasingly in spaces where we can create and we can shape shift and we can build systems and structures that are replicating nature or pattern recognition. Because when a lot of our technologies originally started, they were linear, A to B. And now you see we've got things like blockchain that replicates, mycelial networks. So I have hope.
It was great that you just reminding of how things are shifting and changing. It's funny, as there was another thing you said about, isn't it interesting how we put these limits on our, or this culture puts the culture of modernity, the culture of sort of westernized modernity, puts so many limits on things like, the sensory capacities of an individual, and yet sees the earth as this limitless machine.
And that's so the separation.
Kind of right. That
is the separation. Yeah. And also what has made a huge difference for me is that I am 53 this year. I'm a woman who has gone through perimenopause and I'm in the menopause. And society puts this idea of who you are supposed to be in that. And these labels and this, so masking as a child, not understanding how to fit in. I found myself in my 50s. And then to understand that I now have a framing for how I operate in the world. I was like, oh, thank
You can.
I was like, thank fuck. I was like, oh my God, you know what? I just do not have to, I don't have the energy or the inclination to deal with that nonsense anymore. But there were loads of things I just let go. The idea that, social anxieties, like you're saying, the social anxiety, a lot of it was because I just didn't understand how to navigate. And to me, it felt like everybody else was hiding things.
Yeah.
And not being their true, authentic self. So the fact that we get praised for being authentic, and it's also why I said yes to becoming chair of Mental Health First Aid England, because I was being interviewed by the CEO, Simon, and at MHFA England, we have a annual campaign, which is #MyWholeSelf. And I was speaking to him about the fact that it's not always easy for people like me to be my whole self. It's not safe. And we can't navigate it and all those things. And so when you were talking about your own experiences, it reminded me of why I said yes, because the impact of holding that thing together, trying to hold it together, and then you're supposed to be productive, has an impact on our mental health and well-being. And so we've also, whilst people are now calling it, talking about mental health openly, we've also got to be mindful that we don't call everything poor, it's a mental health condition, because sometimes we're just having a shit day, and that's okay. It's okay.
That's very human.
It's okay to go, I just don't feel like getting out of bed today. It's shit. The weather, whatever. And so we are complex, and we are beautiful, and we are messy, and we are all of those things. And the more we try and squeeze ourselves into these things and hold ourselves in tension, hold our breath, the more fragile we actually are. Lots of liberation. And I look younger now than I did when I was 27, because I just don't give a damn about what I used, all those things I used to hold on to. I'm like, I don't care. It's all right. There's too many people in the world to worry about all the things, the one person who doesn't like me.
Yeah.
And I have to remind myself of that.
Well, it's as you're speaking, it's and I know things are evolving, but it's like, for me, it brings up this imagery as you're talking of like, we've sort of these structures and systems of modernity that have been built, based on the imaginations and the decisions of, our ancestors, not that long ago, a few decades, 100 years maybe, but, we're living in those decisions now, aren't we? We're kind of, and they're coming apart because obviously they've hit their limits.
And that's why I asked the question, what type of ancestor do you want to be? Because we're not ancestors tomorrow, we're ancestors now. And so we need to make conscious choices about the things that we put into the world, or the things we say yes to and the things we say no to. We have to be conscious of that, because the climate crisis that we are experiencing now happened years ago.
Right.
You're the same age as me. So you remember when it was all CFCs in the ozone layer.
100%.
Right. And now it's what? People talk about 1.5% and all this stuff, when without actually going, what do I really need to do? Carbon offsetting and all of that is not going to change anything, but holding the mirror up to myself and going, you know what? I am part of the problem, and I do have choices, and I can make a difference, and changing the narratives, because if we only present visions of the future that are dystopian, we forget that what we are creating is creating us. And that's what it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is why I love and I appreciate things such as Afrofuturism and other futurisms, because it's a cultural, aesthetic, economic, it's a systems thinking. Buckminster Fuller, systems thinking, that's what we need. That's what we need to remember.
And it's, it's a good reminder. And there's something, and maybe we can speak to this, but it's sort of, one thing I'm really intrigued with, it's sort of coming very dominant for me in everything at the moment, is this, we can sort of create these, we can imagine these futures, but it's the actually bringing them into the reality in the moment. Is this kind of like moving into a different way of relating, which I think, we're riffing on here with this kind of in our own selves, our ability to finally become these beings that potentially we've always been, but we've felt suppressed or unable to really, not to have, because the system hasn't really allowed us to sort of open up into our full, whoever it is that we are. And so there's something for me really about what you're learning from when you're working with that question with people, for example. But for me, it's this thing about that realization, that kind of understanding of, because we're in a moment in time where we're able to, we can for the first time ever, this species can look at exactly where it's come from. We can see all of the fuck ups. We can see all of the violence and the shit that's happened and all the amazing stuff. But we can see it all. We can, for the first time ever, we can actually go, wow, right? And so we have this opportunity if we decide to if we're in a position as well. Obviously, I know for many people, it's just, can I survive this day at the moment or whatever? But for those of us who I think actually have a bigger responsibility, those of us who have currently the conditions to be able to think about this work, right? So there's a kind of responsibility with that. But there is this sort of like, when you realize that, when you can see it, in your heart that we're heading, we're going in the wrong direction on so many fronts, then you decide to start to bring this practice, this relationality, to really bring on this future through our own, because that's how the future happens, right? It doesn't.
The future is now.
We've got to create it in the moment. So I'm rambling, but I'd love to know, like, with that kind of provocation that you've been working with, and what are you learning from people and stuff, and anything you can share?
So it's really interesting because over the pandemic made space for cyborg shamanism. Before that, lots of people I spoke to said, oh, it's too hippie. No one's going to want to work with you. It's too out there. It's too nebulous. And suddenly, or it felt like suddenly, but I'd been working on that for years. The pandemic happened and people went, oh, crap. What we saw as normal was broken. And what we saw as impossible is possible. So let's look at, we need different measures of success. And that's what I've been seeing, is that people recognizing that the things that the North Stars and the things that we've held as the direction we should all be going are actually going, no, that's not right. And I have been really heartened to see that it's moved. For some, the conversation has moved from, let's not keep redefining the problem, because we spend a fortune doing that, and we've redefined the problem from our ivory towers, or we use the people who are really experiencing that as research groups and focus groups. And let's focus on what is the value that we need. What's the first value? And for me, and what I've seen, is that first value is regeneration. Everything we do should be regenerative. And what gives me hope is that last year I went and spoke, I spoke and performed at the Interactive Advertising Bureau in Italy's conference, 1,500 people, digital marketeers who are responsible for some of the good and the bad of what's happening in the world. And the whole theme of the conference was regeneration. And so to have a whole conference about advertising, really focus on what does that actually mean, is a start. That's navel gazing. The fact that the last couple of years, most of the speaking gigs I've had have been for banks and for accountancy firms and for those old institutions. And the brief has usually been, come and make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. Well, and that can happen because they trust me to know that I'm coming at it from a place of empathy and compassion. But also people go, okay, so we need to have these conversations. We can't run away from the fact that something's got to change. So going into a bank and saying, what type of ancestor do you want to be? And then I'll give you a little story. As I was speaking at a conference for a huge bank, and they said, the whole theme was, what type of ancestor do you want to be? And they went, yes, well, we're the first bank to get female CEO. And I went, yeah, it took you 300 years. If the planet waits for that in your time frame, we're not going to be here. I mean, we're not going to be here anyhow. So it's that understanding that people are going, I know that I need to be uncomfortable a bit, but I want to do it safely. And so what are the steps to do that? Who do I trust to be able to create and hold that space to recognize that sometimes if I make if I make a poor choice of words or something, that this could be a learning opportunity, a growth opportunity. How do we reframe it as that than something else? What else am I seeing is, the pandemic helped people to the COVID-19 pandemic, because I do believe that it's the start of others.
Many.
Yeah. And look, recognizing that we individually and collectively have a responsibility to the good mental health and well-being of all. So as MHFA England, I see that my chairship as activism, and the fact that we have a responsibility. Good mental health is a social justice issue. So we've got these things of people finally talking about mental health and well-being as a holistic approach, not let's just go and do a workshop and then it's done. But it's a consistent, systemic thing. People talking about systems thinking and understanding the work of people like Joanna Macy and Fritjof Capra. So Buckminster Fuller's having this resurgence. So there is this shift in people that are running some of the institutions. And we've got to remember that those institutions are made of people. So just like you can't say that this company is bad, it's the people inside who are making the decisions that are questionable, not the entity itself. And so there is this shift to, let's have those awkward conversations. Let's have those difficult conversations. And something you said earlier reminded me, and I'll finish with this bit, reminded me of one of my favorite quotes. Stars can't shine without darkness. So as much as we're talking about it's doom and gloom and all of that, we still look up at the stars and go, oh my God, isn't that beautiful? We look for a clear, starry night. So we need to have both, and we have to have chaos and balance. And it's not that it's all doom and gloom. It's both are necessary for us to be able to exist. And that is diversity.
Yeah, again, in some ways, it reflects a little bit the neurodiversity, always in sort of been doing it slightly on the edges, slightly kind of like not really telling anyone about it, slightly feeling like knowing in my heart this is everything, but not really being able to speak with kind of confidence to. Do you know what I mean? But is the relationship with the living earth, right? Because for me, like the stuff I'm sort of fascinated with, and I feel is with all of this overwhelm and with the inability to kind of make, let's go back to very, very difficult to make sense of anything right now. If you look out in the world, the consensus world, you'll go, it's fucked.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, if you're an alien looking at our headlines, you just go, what? I mean, what, it's just, you literally, I feel like, well, what is true in all of this? Well, the earth is true, right? It's true. It's not just real. It's true, right? It's been here for 4.5 billion years, right? There's a lot of intelligence and a lot of integrity in the living earth. Yep. And so if we can, normalize this sense of, and make accessible and, this idea that, again, that we've always had as a species, that, without that rootedness, without that, that relationship with the living earth, however that shows up for us, because that's for me where the creative source lies. That's where the potential to be able to look at the complexity, to look at the overwhelm, to be able to understand more our humility, our sort of sense of the humbleness of the human, and actually allows us to actually sort of, bring a different way. It's almost kind of like, the catalyst for the shifts, I feel, can only really come from the earth or having some relationship. And I don't mean that as in, I don't mean like humans are redundant, because it's about this dance between all of us. But I what I worry in the work that I've done in the past with, in the corporate or the big institutional world is that until there is a kind of acceptance that, none of this stuff exists without a living earth, it's just, that it's like nothing exists. And we have in that separation story, I think, there is a hubrisity that is still very present in our power systems and structures that still sort of sees humans as kind of pulling levers and dominating and do you know what I mean? So I guess I'm,
The one word that I would use for that is remember.
Right.
That's it. We need to remember.
Right.
Because from that remembering, we can then start to make different choices.
And how are you finding, or how are you experiencing that remembering process playing out? I mean, what is it that's in the work you're doing, or how are you seeing that?
How I see that playing out is that there are more of us having these types of conversations. There are more people doing immersive experiences that, like I said, take you from that headspace, because we've got the statistics, we've got all the data, we've got all the insights, and it's turned into kind of like a snow blindness. You just can't see it, or people just actively remove themselves from those spaces. So you're not going to get through to people necessarily through, not everybody, through that bombarding of what have you, those ideas. And it's allowing people to remember the senses, the different senses, the multiple senses. So many organizations are bringing in mindfulness and yoga. Not just and we have to be mindful of some of these things. Bringing yoga in just as an exercise, when you've removed the actual core element of what it is about, that deep connection and spirituality and reverence, is not the right thing either. But creating spaces where breath work has become a thing. So people talk about Wim Hof, but where did that come? Where did he get it from? All of these things, we need to remember what I'm seeing is that more people and more organizations are starting to make space for the things that traditionally are called soft skills or fluffy or what have you, and bringing them in slowly so that people give themselves a moment's pause from the busy working day, especially if you're in a huge office. The changes that I'm seeing are that some of those individuals within those big institutions and those big organizations are going, oh crap, I'm really good at what I do. I've made a career out of it. I've won awards. I've done all of those things. But what's the real impact of what I'm doing? The impact on the planet, on others, the impact on my mental health and well-being. So it goes back to the thing. People are starting to question their real perception of value and their real perception of impact.
There are two stories on Spaceship Earth, a passenger story and a crew story. The passenger story is based on extraction, transaction and distraction, and it's leading us towards collapse. The crew story is based on connection, cooperation and participation. It leads towards regeneration.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
I guess we're butting up constantly, I feel, always. And I think that's the problem, that we're butting up against these systems that, because you could argue that, the constructs that these we're working within these organizations, and like you say, rightly so, it's humans. But the constructs, the entities that they're working in, have more rights than anything, in terms of like their so for me, I get the bit that I'm always sort of going, God, where is this heading? Because are we going to see these, transformational shifts in what it is to be a business? What it is? I can't see it happening at a scale of, because something has changed. Because it's almost your question of ancestry, right? Like how are organizations asking that question, or what would it be like is it possible as an entity to kind of explore that question, your legacy or whatever it is, but how, because at the moment all of our kind of pretty much every organization, every business is whether it likes it or not is operating out of an operating system that's extractive. So, and you can't change that.
Well, I'm going to push back on that.
Push back on it.
Because the way that you ask that is still connected to our ego, because I can't see. It doesn't. Who said that the change has to happen in our lifetime? Just because we can't see the change that's going to happen by making the difference doesn't mean that it's not going to make a difference, right? Many First Nations, Indigenous peoples will look at change in 7 generations.
Yeah.
And we have this, and I say, I'm speaking from privileged global, sitting in the global north, west, the Western world, and saying that we can't. We focus on, we tend to spend a lot of time focusing on, I want to be the one that is named as the person that has made this change. I want to be the one, I. When actually, we just need, it goes back to why I do what I do, right? As a child, I just knew what was right and what was wrong. And it didn't matter whether it was mine or not. And we need to let go of that ego piece that goes, I have to be the one that wears the badge or gets the gold star. Because otherwise, that's why we are where we are, right? Because everybody wants to create a legacy of being remembered for this thing. When I'm talking about ancestors, it's not about whether or not you've got kids or whether or not you've done, it's every day I'm making conscious decisions to try and leave places better than they were when I entered them.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, and I think I the only thing I would add is with the 7 generation though, but that is that is the integrity of having that ability to think that far ahead, right?
Yeah,
and I guess that's the bit I'm struggling with in our current systems, because they are designed to be so short term. If we were able to, if the culture was being cultivated to think like that, right, to have that kind of ancestral awareness.
There are things that we can do as individuals. We don't have to go, oh my God, well, I've got to wait until next week or next year. And that's the thing. We can make decisions every single day about how we choose to show up. You and I choose to show up in this way. Other people can do it. We have choices. Just like, oh, I don't really feel like getting up and doing exercise at 7 o'clock in the morning. But then when I do, I'm like, oh, I feel great.
For me, it's this, it's very easy in the culture to sort of resist a lot of this still, I guess, because you can sort of shut down for it. It requires this intention to want to make these kind of decisions, to want to sort of make these kind of calls, and and it's because there is a sort of you're in many ways it requires the uncomfort again, right, of actually looking at your own impacts, looking at how your behaviors do they actually connect with what I'm speaking to, or am I actually doing something wildly different?
I mean,
right?
Look, you've just this conversation has just reminded me of something my mum used to say. So I'm the eldest of 3. And it's something my mum used to say when my sister and I were fighting. And then my mum would say, who did it? And both of us would go, not me. And my mum would go, what is this? A not me society? What, none of you did it? I love that. What is this?
That's us, isn't it? It's the modern human.
It's a not me society. It's not my fault. I didn't do it because I recycle. What happens to the crap that you put into the recycling bin? Where does it end up?
Yeah, no, gosh, it's very true. One of the things I'd love to just chat to is a project, your Entangled Imaginations project.
Yes.
Is that, can we do that?
Yeah, we can do that.
Maybe you could just sort of just give listeners a sense of what that was all about. But I remember seeing this, and I knew that the Collective Imagination project is something I'm quite dear to, really, know the sort of the organizations who've been pulling that fund together, and I just think it's a brilliant stuff. Yeah, beautiful. But I'd love to know a bit more about your project and how it's panning out and where it's come from.
So over the last couple of years, I realized that I have I can communicate in many, like I said, many mediums. And I realized that I really enjoy and I'm really good at putting together a narrative just through sound, no spoken word. And so I was part of a event where experienced designers met some NGOs. And one of them was Friends of the Earth. There was WWF, Friends of the Earth, and some other NGOs that were climate related. And they brought together some experienced designers, and we volunteered our time to help them look at some of their big problems and how can experienced design help them. And so I was volunteering on one with Friends of the Earth, and the overarching design problem was, how do we get people to remember their connection to nature? And so I suggested that we do it through sound art. We create this narrative that takes people back. So again, removing the external layer of this is who I am, blah, 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 to how do I connect with sound? And so, long story short, ended up in this beautiful partnership with Friends of the Earth, still connected, where we wanted to explore this idea of collectively imagining. So how do you help people to collectively imagine possibility through remembering their relationship with nature? And last year I went off to Brazil and I did some talks there. And whilst I was there, I went for this walk. I spent a week hiking in the national park. And in my head was still this kind of, oh yeah, no, really what I need to do for this Entangled Imaginations project is I need to get people to really care about climate change. And I had been in these tiny villages in Brazil, in the national park, and realized that people don't think like that. They have this symbiotic relationship and they talk about nature in reverence. So before you can get into a body of water, you need to ask permission. If you're in a bad place, bad energy, you shouldn't get into a body of water because you contaminate the water. Now that makes sense to me, because if I'm in a bad mood, no matter how many times I've cooked a meal, the same meal, it will come out crap. So I don't. And so I came back with this, firstly, recognizing my own arrogance in that I'm going to get people to care about climate crisis, when actually it's about remembering. So what I did is I started by working in my local area. So I'm in Greenwich, and there's a beautiful place that is the Greenwich and Deptford borders called Creekside. And as much as Greenwich has Greenwich Park, there actually isn't much other green spaces, big green spaces in the borough, especially around Creekside. So I worked with Friends of the Earth and I'm going to try and co-create this piece of sound art with locals that helps them remember. And so I started by working with some community leaders, and I decided just to take them on a nature walk through Greenwich, through that area. And that nature walk is a vision quest. It's also in the essence of, what's it called? A street wisdom, which is something that a friend had put together and runs. And that's a free website that people can go and join. And the idea is that we can get all the answers that we need from our environment, from the street or from a vision quest, all those things. And so I created my own, which was about getting us to remember ether, air, fire, water, earth. Ether is about negative space. So let's look at the spaces between. So don't look at the tree, look at the space around the tree. What do we notice about that? And so just took people on this walk and asked them just to make observations about how they feel, what they're noticing. I collected all of those insights. And what we noticed is that as I was walking with people and taking them in from big industrial areas through into these hidden pockets of nature, they started to talk about, my shoulders have gone down. I'm breathing deeper. Oh, I can hear the birds. Oh, I feel great. I feel warmer. And so getting people to firstly refocus, reprioritize what they listen to. So what I did, took all those insights, turned it into this collective sound art. Which actually is it's recreating that walk. And so this project was a pilot to see if I could do it, to see if we could do it. So I used the data from Friends of the Earth. And so the pilot is now launched. And so I'm about to go away for about a month. And when I come back, the idea is that we will start to look at how can we expand this? Because I've spoken to local people and I've shared with them the sound art. It's on a website called earthechoes.earth. And so you can
link to it.
Yep, you can go, you can listen. I suggest people put their headphones on, close your eyes and just listen. And you go on this walk, and even people listening to it have realized that they suddenly go, they drop into that interoceptive, bodily. So that's a starting point to start to expand and go, what could it be? Is it that just in that, I say just, I'm not minimizing it, in that first form as a pilot, could we replicate that in other areas that are deprived of green spaces? Could we expand it to something bigger?
It's beautiful, and it's. I think this is the theme, isn't it? That's come through this conversation we've been having about the separation, the severance,
yep.
And how we are relational beings. It's like the information, the knowledge is being created through relationship with this more than human world, through our bodies, through each other, and where we've severenced that in this. There's so many beautiful things that modernity has given us, right? But actually at the cost of this separation. And that, just listening to you talking about people walking into that, down that path, into that space, and what you were talking about, like, what's happening between the trees. What is all the knowledge is happening between us, right?
Yep.
That's what's going on. So it's really making me, I get very excited by, creative invitations, provocations, experiences like what you're speaking to, because they are portals, aren't they? They're ability to open us up to something and to maybe have it, just to give us that kind of like, okay.
And like you said, I love that word, invitation. It's an invitation. You make a choice about whether or not you go in there. And so I have started to recognize that my role as an artist in some way is to distort time, right? Because I'm presenting you with an opportunity for a pause and to feel something different, and to then make a choice about what happens next. What do you do next? So there was one young woman who I took on the walk, and I know her because she's in the area, and she said, "Oh, I hate nature. I don't like birds. Oh, no. All I hear is trains and this and that and blah blah blah." And so we started this walk, and before we'd even got to the nature bit, we came up to this. There's the long road, there is a bit of, I love what they've done, the council have done. They've rewilded this bit of area by the bus stop. And so you've got all these kind of plants and everything, and it's wild and it's gorgeous. And she went, "Oh, look at that. It's a mess. Why don't the council clear it up?" And I went, "What? Do you have hay fever?" And she's like, "Yes, and it's getting worse every year." So I said, "Well, that shop we just walked past sells local honey. And the reason that this place is rewilded is because it attracts bees and pollinators and everything. And that if you have local honey, then it will help with your hay fever." And she went, "Well, the council need to put a sign up." I went, "Yeah, but if they put a sign up, would you read it? What about your role and responsibility in finding out about that?" Because that's that thing, right? Negating responsibility. So by the time we finished the walk, she's like, "I really want to get involved in some of these projects because now I understand that if it's helping me." And so that's the thing with much of the things that we do around climate and nature and trying to change behavior. For some, it's so big and it's so out there that people separate themselves and go, "Well, it's got nothing to do with me." But if you can make it hyper local, like we did during the pandemic and the lockdowns, we all had those local communities. And suddenly we've gone from not trusting your neighbours to suddenly everybody's on the WhatsApp group with all your numbers and sharing everything, the innermost workings of your life. That trust on a hyper-local level is where I think we start.
Yeah, it's beautiful. There's two questions I would love to ask you, but also just maybe just before we do that, do you want to just speak? I know you've got quite quite, some things coming up. You're off to TED. Maybe you could just tell us a bit about that. And then I know you've got this podcast project as well, but maybe you could just share a little bit about that, and then I'll ask you our kind of becoming crew invitation questions.
Okay. So TED have this program called TED in Vancouver. So the main big TED event has a program called Ignite. And so what it is they bring together change makers, people who have big ideas. TED is all big ideas. And so what they do is they bring in together people who have big ideas as the ones to watch, people who they want to support. And so I had been nominated as to join the TED program, the TED Ignite program. And I am fortunate enough to be going next weekend. I leave. Very excited. Now I can start getting excited. There was so much to do before that.
Yeah.
And so as part of that program, what happens is we're not necessarily doing a big TED talk, but we have support of the team, mentoring. We have this community that has been formed. And we also have a year's free access to their global network of speakers and everybody and everything. And so I went, okay, what is the question that I would like to ask there? What would I like to bring out from there? And also thinking about, look, I'm 53 this year. I don't necessarily want to be traveling around the world speaking on stages all the time when I'm 60. So what is my succession plan? What is the thing that I want to do next? What's the next piece of Cyborg Shamanism that I can take outside just the conference space and actually bring it to more people? And how can I raise up other speakers, other people who are doing amazing things, and continue to learn? So it's been this whole succession plan for myself, the big ask, and amplification. And so what I have done is I have put together a proposal for a podcast series. It's a pilot, and it's called Whispers, Echoes, Tomorrow. And the reason it's that is whispers of our ancestors. The things that we're doing now are creating echoes, and they will impact tomorrow. So it's still that past, present, future. And what I have done is the same framework that I use for the Entangled Imaginations, Friends of the Earth project, that ether, air, fire, water, earth, those elements. I'm using that as the framework to have conversations with futurists and artists and philosophers and people from the global south and indigenous communities who normally don't get to speak about the things that are really significant in the world. The recognizing that it is peoples and lands in the global south that are currently on the receiving end. And you can tell this is menopause brain because I can't quite find the word. So you're going to get 12 to describe what I'm trying to remember.
That's right.
I'm not apologizing. Definitely not apologizing for the fact that I have menopause brain. It is the peoples and the lands of the global south are on the receiving end of the worst impact of climate crisis, and yet they contribute the least to it. So I wanted to give those voices amplification. I wanted to amplify those voices. And so this whole idea from the podcast came from, we've already surpassed several climate tipping points. And so if I was to put a message in a bottle to future generations, what would it be? What would I write? What would I put into that bottle? So it's the essence is I'm creating time capsules, but I'm asking people from the global south to have a conversation like this, to talk about their knowledge and wisdom in the sense of how it's linked to technology and climate and those things, and end with, what would you put in that message? What would you put in that bottle to send to future generations? And the reason I'm asking that is because I then would love to invite the audience, the people listening, to take up one of those challenges. That's it. That's
beautiful. I love that. And I love it. And it's also the other thing I was thinking as you were talking about indigenous peoples and peoples in the global south is also that and this is the uncomfortable reality of living in a Western population, but it's their lands, their resources, their people that have underpinned this capitalist way of living. So, they've been underneath really what we have perceived as kind of modern life.
Yeah.
So I know, but it's it is, and I think because that is something which more people in the West are starting to understand.
Yeah.
That what we have perceived as entitled to, and our way of life is coming from somewhere else.
Yeah,
really.
And I would like to give those communities, people, space for their voices, not the colonization and extraction of their knowledge systems and repackages, repackaging and repurposing and going, well, now I'm doing neo tantra instead of this, or I'm doing my version of yoga instead of this, like goat yoga instead of whatever. Too much of the knowledge and the wisdom and understanding has been taken and repackaged and repurposed and then sold in a different way. What I would like to do is to create the space for people to share their own truths, their own knowledge, their own wisdom, and so bridge that gap between what is perceived and what could be possible. So move away from everything that we see about the future is dystopian.
Yeah.
And actually give space for, well, let's collectively imagine different possibilities, because it's really interesting when people ask me to speak about what's the future of. I said, well, there's not one future. So let's start by reframing your question.
Oh, Adah, thank you so much. I'd love to close with this question, really. Like, what does this idea of becoming crew, where you're at today, what does it bring up for you? What comes up?
I love the framing. So this idea of becoming crew is, for me, it's the same question that I'm asking. It's just a different framing of what type of ancestor do you want to be. It is, when I talk about it from a psychological safety space, it is creating safer spaces, because it's active, not safe, which is passive. It's not being afraid to step into those uncomfortable spaces, because through that there is growth and there is knowledge and there are insights. And so I am, on a personal level, I will always be working on that journey. Anybody who says I've got there, that's it. I don't really trust you. Anything that comes along and acts like it, and people start putting it on a pedestal and going, it's a panacea, this is the way, I'm instantly skeptical, because we are a work in progress. Life is an experiment, a series of experiments. And that's what, even just that, seeing life as a series of experiments, that sometimes you just go, well, I tried, no, it didn't work. Okay, I move on.
I love that. Beautiful. Thank you. And then I guess finally, whether this invitation, maybe there's something you might invite our listeners to kind of play with. It could be a provocation. It might be a practice. It might be an invitation to try something, to do something. It might be, it could be anything, but some kind, in that spirit of participation, what might you leave the listeners?
So, I just suddenly had two. Okay.
Two's fine.
Yeah. The first one is, I think because I'm really thinking and feeling into this podcast that I'm creating, and curating, is that question of, what would you put into that bottle? What would be the message or the thing or the artifact that you would put into that bottle? And then how could you make sure that once you've decided what that is, what could you do to make sure that you don't need to put that in the bottle?
Beautiful. Thank you for
What's
that.
There was
that.
It's like, actually, yeah, what would you put in? What would you write on that bottle?
Yeah.
And then how could you work now to make sure that you don't ever put that in there? So that's one.
Wow.
And the other one is, And it's about relationships. So, and I'll send you the link actually. So it's about understanding that intimacy is into me, I see. It's about understanding how we can be intimate with ourselves first and not externalize everything. And what I did a few years ago was I had a breakup from a relationship and I was heartbroken. I was like, oh God, I miss him. And I went, no, what I miss is the intimacy. And so I created this exercise, which is I wrote down the times that we'd been intimate. And I said, how do I feel? I feel safe. I feel secure. I feel playful. I said all those things. And I ended up with this list of characteristics, things. And I said, right, every day for the next 30 days, I'm going to do one thing that is by myself, for myself, that makes me feel one of those things. So it makes me feel safe, makes me feel secure, makes me feel playful. And I documented it on Instagram. And so I feel that much of the things that we go through at the moment is because we're trying to externalize everything and make everything and everybody else responsible for our happiness, for our truth, and all of those things. And so whilst there is the message in a bottle, the other side to that, I think, is just, I'll send you the thing, but think about the things that make you feel seen, make you feel heard, that aren't dependent on somebody else. Because when we have that ability to be present for ourselves and understand that true presence and mindfulness and meditation are all those things, then I think we have the capacity to grow and develop and stop putting other things in place of what we really need to do.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you. And that's a beautiful and feels quite a vital invitation. So really appreciate that. Really appreciate you taking the time for this conversation and for everything you're doing. And good luck out in Vancouver, and we will keep in touch.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for the invitation and for this great conversation.
Thank you, Adah.
All right. Thank you.
So there you go. That was me and Adah Parris. Do check out the links to Adah's work all below, and let us know anything that's come up for you, any thoughts, threads, stuff that conversation has brought up. Please do leave a comment, or drop us a mail, or DM us, or messages on Instagram, whatever is easier. And if it has if it's spoken to you, or you found something in that conversation, please do share with a friend or on your socials. All of this will help others to find the podcast. So thank you very much indeed. And as I said before, best way to support us now, if you're not already on the Substack, is go to the Substack, sign up, and then you'll get each episode into your inbox. That's becomingcrew.substack.com. And remember to grab a ticket for our live gatherings. Again, link below to find those. Okay. Look after yourself out there. Keep re-entangling yourself with this more than human world that we're a part of. And until next time, peace and out.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles;